Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpattykake. I am an author and robot, and today looking at some writing questions. But before we get started, I'm gonna try to be really quick about this. The Patty Wagon down below, Lemoy, join it. It's a link in the description to the prompt for January. We'll read your story. Have a good time. How'd I do? That said, let's get started. Tips on avoiding overly expositional dialogue. Reading back on some of the earlier works, I realized that I was not being subtle in writing when I'd intended to, and much of my expositional dialogue, introducing characters, their backgrounds, revealing information for their plot, did not feel organic. My work is dialogue heavy, and I also tend to avoid an expositional prologue and thrust the reader straight into the story, then fill in the background information later throughout the book. So any advice on how to go about not being cringe-worthy / overly obvious in my characters' expositional dialogue would be appreciated. Okay, number one is I appreciate you not using a prologue to try to force your readers into exposition. This is probably the biggest issue that I have with prologues, is they are often used to hint at or push a character into one of the more climactic moments of the story, to push the reader to open immediately to a climactic moment in the story, but from kind of a different perspective than what will take place at the beginning of the story. And I most clearly remember this being done in freaking Twilight millions of years ago when it came out and I was a teenager. And then I don't know if that was a big thing before Twilight happened, but I feel like it especially became popular after Twilight happened, where now so many people use the freaking prologue to tease at a tense, high tension moment, words, later in the story, but just from a slightly different perspective, and it's not good. I recently read a story in a contest that did that. And it was very jarring because it wasn't just a completely different perspective, like at the beginning of Twilight, and it's been forever since I've read Twilight, but at least it was still in the same character's perspective. The scene I think it was different details of the scene, and you had internal monologue rather than being in the scene, something like that. But in the story that I read for the contest a few months ago, the perspective was a completely different character, and then you get to that point in the story and you haven't been in that character's perspective like at all. So then the prologue is just jarring. The prologue should be important information that falls outside of the timeline of the story but is necessary for understanding the story. It shouldn't be an exposition dump. It shouldn't be a skip to one of the more climactic scenes in your story. It should be a necessary short moment that is outside of the story you're telling. When I read a story that has the prologue beginning, I know I'm talking completely off subject, but when I read a story that has the prologue that jumps right into the tense moment, I think this author does not believe in their own abilities to start the story where it actually starts. They don't believe that the story is eye-catching enough or is compelling enough at its natural beginning, that they feel like they have to trick the reader with this other thing. Now, going back into the question, how do you avoid overly expositional dialogue? This is what authors, playwrights have to do for stage plays and even screenplays, because those are all dialogue. It's especially more common with stage plays. I think it's harder with stage plays because you can't do flashbacks, and the scenes are longer than they would be in a movie. Movie scenes are a lot shorter and can go to jump from place to place to place. But with a stage play, you have to kind of play out a lot, and you can't just jump all of the time. And one of the most important things that you can do for making your dialogue more organic is know what your characters already know about each other and play off of that. So if a character knows that somebody else's character's dad has not been having a good time at the hospital, and they text regularly, then when they meet up for a burger because they're distracting, Joe from his dad being in the hospital, then Michael's not going to be like, "Hey Joe, so how's your dad? I know he's at the hospital. Is he doing okay?" Because they've already had that conversation. And so then that, if you ask that, then you're showing that your character is asking something specifically for the reader's benefit, not to show these two's relationships. So instead of doing that to get the information out because you want the reader to know that Joe's dad is in the hospital, have them go and get their burgers and they're sitting down and Joe is maybe playing with his fries and not really eating. And, Michael, it says something, maybe try to distract him. I got a B on my last test. I got an F on my test. Oh my gosh, my mom almost burned the house down yesterday. And then you could have Joe be like, I think my dad's gonna die. And that just a moment of breaking in would show that Joe hasn't been sharing everything with Michael, and it would be brand new information. It would also show us an intensity. So to not write overly expositional dialogue, know what all of your characters know and have an idea of how much they talk outside of that scene, because they're not going to go over information that they already have. And I find this a lot in books, and I always when I'm reading them, I circle stuff and going, why the frick are they having this conversation? Shouldn't this character already know this? And then inadvertently, the character always tells me that they already know something and they just had a conversation for my benefit, and I pulled out of the book. Also, a telltale for yourself is, I as you already know, or I know that you know this, or like I said yesterday, blah, 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 blah. That is you telling the reader that the characters are being informed specifically for their benefit and not because the characters need to have this conversation. Another thing, and I will always, always, always push this as a cheat for how to write more authentic characters, is always know in every scene what your character is doing in that scene. What do they want? What tactics are they willing to use to get it? And if they're in there to distract themselves, like Joe wants to be distracted from his dad, and then partway through that scene, his motivation for being in that scene, his reason for being in that scene could shift to, I need help because I can't handle this on my own anymore. And then what is he able to do with having that need? Does he have the ability to override his pride and ask for help? Does he need to be coaxed into asking for help? And so by knowing what they need, what your characters need, what they already know about each other, about the ongoing situations between the characters in the scenes, or what they don't know, and what tactics they're willing to use to get what they need, you'll have more authentic dialogue and character choices as they make decisions toward their goal and based on what they either know or don't know. Does anyone get hesitant to show off their writing if it gets too dark? I mean, I don't. I just let people know that I am terribly broken. At this point, I'm totally okay with being associated as the Jeffrey Dahmer person. I should probably be worried about that book once ever it comes out and people actually see it. I think that's probably one of the darkest things that I've written so far, but Dead End Drive is pretty dark if you ignore the comedy. I kind of forget that Creatures Lie Here is pretty dark because I forget how much sexual abuse there is in there until I actually reread it and I go, oh yeah, there is very a lot of sexual abuse in this. But no, I don't worry. And I'm totally okay with people getting those associations with me. But let me know which. I'm pretty straightforward to people about my interests, where they lie, and where my inspiration comes from. I know other authors aren't quite as straightforward, but let me know how you feel about sharing your stuff. And you don't have to share what it is that might make you a little more hesitant to share, but are there things that you write that you're like kind of scared of people seeing this side of my brain and judging me for it? Is the hero having a romantic connection with the main rival interesting? It can be. Enemies to lovers is a very, very popular trope. This just all depends on how it's written. But it's very popular. Just write well and nobody will care about what tropes you use. That's the moral of the story. Is internal conflict absolutely necessary to create a good story? So I have been watching Abby Emmons' YouTube videos and reading Story Genius by Lisa Cron. Both of them say basically the same thing. No internal conflict, no story. Lisa Cron goes so far as to saying that you can't even consider that something is a story without an internal conflict. It could be a plot or something, but it isn't a story. Abby Emmons considers, from what I understand, that it's only because of the emotional appeal and how we identify with the characters' internal conflicts that we are interested in the story. She uses examples of the movie Divergent, saying that we don't care about the characters because we know nothing about the internal conflict. Lisa Lisa Kron goes further, saying that plotting is wrong if you don't know the internal conflict of your characters first. Now, it seems to me as pretty reasonable points. I just finished reading Oblomov from Goncharkov, and it's a powerful story, clear masterpiece, and it's all about internal conflict. The guy is lazy as hell, but you get to understand why, and he tries to change but fails. Anyway, I don't want to give any spoilers for those of you who haven't read it, but it's a really good book. And there is a but, I still enjoy action movies and novels, and I'm ashamed to say, but I enjoy Gravity with Sandra Bullock. In it, there is absolutely no internal conflict, only action, and it's pretty good. I can think of many movies or stories or books without much internal conflict, and that work really well. There isn't much of a deep connection with the characters, but the plot is amazing and the action is all over the place. Studies of personalities show some people are much more oriented, 60% of women, and others are more object-oriented, people-oriented, and men are more object-oriented. Maybe I'm in between, but I don't know, and the advice I watch from Abby Emmons and Lisa Kron are from people who are more people-oriented. Maybe Tom Clancy or others would disagree, so it makes sense to me to have internal conflict is good. That said, are those authors right or wrong about their ideas that you can't have a good story without it? Would a good action story with great plot twists and moving all around be good as well, even without internal conflict or with minimal internal conflict? I'm thinking of stuff like the first Die Hard now. So there are no steadfast rules in writing. And so for Lisa Kron, and if Abby Emmons said it, that you can absolutely not have a good story whatsoever if you don't have internal conflict, that's not true. You can have fine stories. They're just, maybe they mean you can't have really deep stories. They're usually a little more shallow if they are relying more on action in the plot as opposed to an internal conflict of some kind. But generally, characters go through some kind of change throughout a story. With Indiana Jones, you would consider that more of a plot-driven story than a character-driven story, and that's really what's, I feel like, being talked about here, because plot-driven stories don't necessarily have heavy internal conflict with the character because they're trying to accomplish a goal. But that doesn't mean that they are not stories, and it's kind of an elitist thing, in my opinion, to say that the story is not a story if it doesn't have a character internal conflict of some kind. It'd be like if I completely just discounted everything in a story because it doesn't have a plot. Oh yeah, this character's not doing anything, they just kind of don't do anything the whole time, but it's a great story because this character wonders about their relationship with their mother, and at the very end decides that they're gonna stop struggling with that relationship with their mother and then call their mother on the phone. Like, a good story has both plot and character, but to say that a story is not a story if it doesn't have internal conflict is elitism, I think. This is also something that very bothers me when we talk about going to Abby Emerson saying it's only because of emotional appeal and how we identify with characters' internal conflicts that make us interested in the story. I never emotionally identify with any character in any book, except for Jeffrey Dahmer. I read a story because I'm interested in the perspective of the author. I am never emotionally connected to the characters. I never cry for the characters. I never root for the characters. I was disappointed when the character died in Carrie and Comfort, but, you know, no, I'm not going to spoil that. But I didn't cry. I wasn't emotionally attached. I was just like, gosh, dang it. That's like killing the hero of a story, and I still have half of the freaking book left. What can you do after you killed the hero of the story halfway through the story? This is a very female way to look at reading, because women especially are more emotion-based creatures. And I've always had a very difficult time connecting with these sorts of people. They are all over the writing community. You see the feeling first people, the emotion first people, and every writer that I personally know emotionally writes. They emotionally connect with their characters. They'll cry for their characters while they're writing, and I don't do that. I don't feel emotionally connected. I don't feel emotionally inspired by my characters, and that likely has something to do with being Asperger's, you know, being a robot. I don't emotionally connect to anything, and I look for the logic, the reason in the character actions, to analyze the character actions, to analyze the story, and to analyze the perspective that the author is trying to show me through these characters, the the psychology that the author is trying to show me through these characters and the experience that the author is trying to show me through these characters. It is never an emotional experience for me. It is always an analytical one. And so with anybody saying it has to, if the characters, oh my gosh, this is why I get so much on my nerves, because I cannot emotionally connect with characters. I can't. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, I can't connect with characters in books. But then you've got all of these agents and then authors like Abby Emmons over here saying that you have to emotionally connect to these characters in order for it to have any worth. Okay, well, now you're completely discounting what my perspective is and what perspectives like mine. I'm sure I'm not the only robot that feels this way, but to say that you have to emotionally connect to characters in order for it to be a good book and it's the only thing that makes you interested in a story. Dude, I did not emotionally connect to anybody in freaking 120 Days of Sodom. I wouldn't want to connect to any of the victims in that book because that would be intense. I wouldn't want to emotionally connect with any of the abusers in that book because, why would I want to connect with the abuser? I know, I already said Jeffrey. There is a difference, okay? But you don't have to be emotionally invested in a story to be interested in a story. Now, if you're a very emotional person, that might be where you get the payoff. As an analytical person, I get the payoff by better understanding another human mind, by seeing how their logic works, by seeing how they build a story, by seeing what experiences they've chosen to show me, and by showing me what parts of their perspective, their morals, their beliefs, their values come through in the story. But I do not emotionally connect, and it is so close-minded, in my opinion, for women writers especially to say you have to be emotional and emotionally connected or else it's a crapshoot. That's fine for you, but not everybody thinks that way. And so authors, just know, newbie authors, oldie authors, whatever, there are different ways to write. There are no steadfast rules, I would say, in writing, except write well. That's my only steadfast rule. Write well. Waiting for my next round of edits to come back from my publisher for my first book and starting to feel nervous. So after writing for all my life, the last couple of years have been pretty surreal. But because the book I wrote actually received interest from publishers and I signed an actual freaking book deal, I knew publishing was a long process, and COVID has pushed back publishing schedules as well, so the real bulk of my publisher's edits only started this summer. The first two structural edits have gone without too much of a glitch, though as we get into the detailed copy edits, I'm starting to feel pretty nervous about everything. It's my first book, it's supposed to be goofy and funny, and I can't help but worrying, what if others don't like it? What if people don't find it funny? Would love to chat with others on here who have published books and to check the feeling is natural. And if so, do you have any tips on how to ignore these worries and think of other things? So, number one, if you're writing humor, there will always be people who don't think that your version of humor is funny. But in books, it makes it really easy to miss the deadpan voice of hilarity because there's no ability to show inflection, and so you kind of just have to hope that the other people get that you're being ridiculous or you're making a joke and not being serious. As somebody who wrote satire, I can tell you there are people that have taken Dead and Drive like 100% seriously, when I thought it was pretty obvious when Johnny's tennis suit is basically painted on. I thought that it was fairly obvious that it was over the top and kind of tongue-in-cheek, you know? So I thought my voice in general was fairly obvious for it being kind of a joke and funny in Dead and Drive, and here is an example, alright? After all, Doc had been the top of her class in medical school. She'd been named the most desired doctor in New Orleans up until her practice closed just 6 years out of medical school. No one could argue the skill and attention she brought to work. However, her losing feature would always be her lack of compassion. Unfortunately, as a doctor, short of a soft touch, she had no place in the private sector. And though she would have fit perfectly into the government healthcare, she found the private practice for Agatha J. Benedict to be far more lucrative and respectful than another black woman at the mercy of the government's dollar. So that is supposed to be tongue-in-cheek. Clearly an exaggeration of some kind. And there's all sorts of tongue-in-cheek humor in Dead and Drive. On sale right now, you know. You should go get it. It's pretty good. And people still took it seriously. So if you're writing something that's supposed to be funny, expect certain people not to get it. And also expect to fight for your jokes with some people. Because not your audience, and that's fine. Theoretically, your agent should understand your point of view and your humor if they chose your book. The best thing that you can do to ignore the feelings is just go and busy yourself with something else. Start writing something else, play some games, go find a different hobby to do while you're waiting for your book, work on your next book. Like, the feelings of nervousness to receive your feedback are always going to be there because you want to know what somebody else is critically looking at in your book and what they're going to find that's technically wrong or that you're going to have to fix. It might not even be wrong. It might just be that you need to add something into your book to make it make sense. I think that it will get easier with you in the future. This is your first book, and if you're not used to receiving feedback or having other people's eyes on your work, then it's gonna, like, you might feel like you're gonna die, especially if you're a very, very emotionally connected person. But the more you get feedback, and especially once you start collecting some negative reviews or start seeing that some people just don't like your book, but other people do like your book, you're gonna start hopefully building a resistance to it and then being like, meh. But that could just be the robot in me. I never have issues with it because I'm like, But somebody with more emotions than I am is gonna have to, like, talk to people that have emotions about how to deal with their emotions. How do you add fillers while still progressing the story? You know how in, like, cartoons they have fillers, but they're still making the way towards the goal? You mean like how on Dragon Ball Z they spend episodes just screaming and powering up? Like Miraculous Ladybug, every episode is about them fighting the new villain, but the writer is still somehow inching them closer to defeating the Hawk Moth. Or in Pokemon, Ash spends his days training and going on adventures with his friends, but they are able to type the filler episodes into them getting closer to the goal. IDK, what I'm asking makes sense. I'm not really a writer, but I had a series idea that I really wanted to bring to life. Filler episodes and filler chapters in general should be avoided. If you're writing a book and you write filler chapters in there, by the time that it gets picked up by an editor or an agent, if it gets picked up by an editor or an agent with those filler episodes, they're going to tell you to cut the filler content or to make the content necessary. This is very normal for trimming the fat, for making the story more compelling, more momentum, because the filler parts of your story are going to slow the momentum and slow the progress. You should always have a reason for why that moment is in the story. What are the characters trying to accomplish? Whether it's learning something new, whether it's getting a key to get to the next level. Every moment in your story should contribute to the thing moving forward. And that's really what this comes down to. I always talk about it. I've already talked about it in this video before. Always know why your characters are in the scene they're currently in, what they're trying to get, and how they get it from that scene. And maybe in this scene, it's just, to find a farmer so that they can ask the farmer where this other person is because they're looking for this other person and they were told the farmer knows. And so then you have to go on this whole issue of finding the farmer so that you can get the information from him and then go to the next person. Every action that your characters take should lead them closer to the eventual goal that they're getting. Now, you can obfuscate what their eventual goal is by making that farmer go missing, or by making the farmer not actually know the thing, and then you have to go and check out whatever the farmer tells you you're supposed to check out in order to get the next thing, that gets you the key that makes you able to go onto the path to the next actual step of your goal. Make your original content as concise as you can, and avoid filler content. I don't know anybody who doesn't skip the filler content when they find filler content. But what do I know? I'm just a robot. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please like, share, subscribe, send me stuff that you would like me to cover on this channel. I'll eventually do an ebook format video soon. It just didn't work out for today. And stick around, watch more videos, enjoy life, and until next time, don't die. Dear Madam Astra, that's me. We regret to inform you that on August 1st, your employer, Agatha Jane Benedict, owner of the Benedict estate, peacefully passed away in her sleep. Oh, that's so sad. Wait. Let me try that again. Oh my goodness. That's so sad. Yeah, I think I'm ready. With millions of dollars on the line and the opportunity for your every need to be taken care of for life, tell me, is there anything more valuable than that? I didn't think so. Dead End Drive is a dark comedy novel that makes 3 promises. 1, an illustrious estate in Louisiana. 2, an opulent dinner affair for all in attendance. And 3, and most importantly of all, lots and lots of competitive murder. So if you're looking for a cozy book to settle in with for the spooky season, I've only got one question for you. Will I see you at the Will reading?